This is from the book also, Harry. Quote, but sadly, all of this nation's financial regulators, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Office of Thrift Supervision are at best incompetent and at worst captive to the companies they are supposed to regulate, end quote. I want to ask you about the Federal Reserve specifically, Harry. What are your thoughts regarding the Fed?
You've got to take the regulatory powers away from them. They had that power for decades. They never regulated the banks. They aided and abetted. They were the shield that allowed the collapse of 2008 to occur. If they didn't want to exercise the power then, why should we trust them with it going forward? They failed miserably at their jobs. They need to be held accountable. They shouldn't be allowed to regulate the banks. All their regulators on the payroll there should be fired immediately.
You said to me last year in May that the Fed is to the point of total corruption. Do you still believe that?
Yes, they're there to protect the banking industry. If you notice, they won't tell us anything. There's no transparency there who's borrowing from the discount window. So if you're an American citizen and you're putting money into a bank that's on the verge of failure, you wouldn't know that. And your deposits are only protected up to $250,000 limit. So if you have any money more than that, let's say you're a small business and you have $400,000 deposited in a bank that's about to fail, you wouldn't know it. And you would put extra deposits in there and would not be protected. They're there to protect the banks, not the taxpayers. They need to be stripped of their regulatory powers. They're not doing their job.
What about Alan Greenspan? Because you said to me last year he was the lead aider and abetter. Is that how you feel looking back?
Well, my nickname for him is not the maestro. It's Mr. Bubbles. He never met a bubble he wanted to prick. He'd only pick up the pieces afterward, make an easy money policy, hurt American savers, hurt American retirees that were living off fixed income investments. He didn't care about them. He wanted the banks to have healthier balance sheets. He wanted to rescue the financial system time and time again. And that's what led us to this crisis last year. Basically, was an aider and abetter.
Let's get back to Bernie Madoff for a minute. Talk about how you knew that Madoff's numbers were fraudulent.
Well, it was pretty clear just looking at his performance chart. It went up at a 45-degree angle. And those kind of charts don't exist in finance. They only exist in geometry. He only had 4% of his months that were losing months. And that would be akin to a Major League Baseball player batting .960, given what we know about the ethical climate of Major League Baseball. You'd expect cheating immediately. And no one questioned that. 96% of the months were up. That would be equivalent to an NFL team going 96 wins and 4 losses over a 100-game span. Can't happen. Can't happen in sports. Can't happen in finance.
This also from the book. As I continued examining the numbers, the problems with them began popping out as clearly as a red wagon in a field of snow. There was a stunning lack of financial sophistication. Anyone who understood the math of the market would have seen problems immediately. A few minutes later, I laid the papers down on my desk. This is a fraud, Frank, I told him. You're an options guy. You know there's no way in hell this guy is going to get these returns from this strategy. He's either got to be front-running or it's a Ponzi scheme. But whatever it is, it's total BS. And that's when we began chasing Bernie Madoff. What year was that when you came to that conclusion, Harry?
It was early 2000, and it was pretty clear at that point there were 2 fraud theories in operation here. And we didn't have enough information to decide which one was actually true or not, so we held them to be equally true. Fraud theory number 1 was the returns were real, but they were gathered through illegal means, mainly known as front-running. Fraud theory number 2 was that it was a Ponzi scheme. Either way, Bernie Madoff was going to go to jail for a long, long time.
Before we go on, Harry, I want to ask you about the banks and the banks' balance sheets, because this bothers me. I know it bothers you. Is the government today aiding and abetting fraud on the banks' balance sheets? Because they're phony, aren't they, Harry?
Oh, the balance sheets are cooked. They're allowing the banks to keep the offshore vehicles off their balance sheets. I suspect that many of the major money center banks have larger balance sheets that are hidden and offshore than they have onshore and are reporting to shareholders. And I also believe that the Fed is granting regulatory forbearance, which means they're looking the other way as the banks refuse to mark their assets and liabilities to the market. They're basically marking to model or keeping them at historical prices, which are nothing but a fantasy. They're allowing the banks to extend and pretend on their balance sheets. They're looking the other way, keeping interest rates to savers very low and minuscule. And that's just nothing but a direct subsidy to the banking system so that they continue paying their bonuses. And it's so unfair to the taxpayers and to the savers and to the retirees who are living on fixed income. But the Fed doesn't care about us, the taxpayers. They only care about serving their masters, the banks.